For years, Earth had worked hard to earn its place among the stars. Humanity was new to the galactic stage, still learning how to deal with species that had been flying between the stars for thousands of years. Most saw humans as curious, unpredictable, and sometimes reckless, but over time something began to change. The way humans treated their friends, how loyal they were, how fiercely they stood by their word, made others notice. When a few smaller civilizations were struggling against the powerful Galactic Council, Earth did not turn away. The Council had always ruled everything. They made the laws, controlled the trade routes, and punished any planet that tried to grow without permission. For centuries, no one had dared to question them. But when the Tralvians lost their home to a council mining project, and when the gentle Mer were forced to pay impossible taxes, humans stood up and said, "This isn't right." It shocked everyone. No one expected a young race from a small blue planet to challenge the galaxy's oldest authority, but humanity didn't care about reputation or fear. They remembered what it was like to be powerless. They remembered their own wars, their struggles, and how unity had saved them from extinction. So when the Tralvians called for help, Earth answered. When the Mer sent a message asking for protection, humanity didn't hesitate. Soon other small civilizations joined in. Together, they called themselves the Coalition of Free Worlds. At first, the Council ignored them. To them, humans were a passing distraction, a small flame that would soon burn out. But the coalition began to grow faster than anyone predicted. Trade between the free worlds flourished. New technology, shared freely among allies, began to challenge even the Council's ancient systems. For the first time in living memory, hope was spreading through the galaxy. Planets that had once been silent were now daring to dream of freedom. Within a few short years, Earth had become a symbol of courage. The coalition wasn't about power. It was about trust. Humans weren't the strongest or the oldest, but they were loyal. They kept their promises even when it cost them. Their soldiers fought beside alien allies not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in something greater than themselves. But in the halls of the Galactic Council, that hope felt like a threat. The Council's high command saw the growing unity of the smaller races as a danger to their rule. They called secret meetings. They spoke of maintaining balance and preserving stability, but their real goal was control. To them, the idea of independent worlds working together without their permission was unacceptable. The warnings came quietly at first. Human ambassadors received cold stares at meetings. Council officials stopped returning messages. Rumors spread that the Council was preparing something final. Earth's leaders tried to stay calm. They sent messages of peace asking for talks and understanding. The coalition had no plans for war. But behind every kind word there was unease. Then came the silence. It started with the Tralvians. Their world had been full of music and color, cities built among crystal mountains that shimmered under twin suns. One day communication was normal. The next, everything was gone. No signal, no life signs, just emptiness where an entire civilization had been. People thought it was a mistake at first, a technical error. But when the Mer homeworld went dark days later, the truth became impossible to ignore. One by one, every allied planet stopped answering. Entire systems went cold, their stars still shining, but their worlds lifeless. The Council's news channels claimed it was natural disasters and unfortunate accidents. But humanity knew better. At the United Earth Space Command, officers watched the reports in disbelief. Faces grew pale. Some cried quietly at their desks. These weren't just allies, they were friends. People had shared meals, stories, and victories together. Now there was nothing left of them. Across Earth cities, the mood changed overnight. Crowds gathered in silence, watching the news screens that repeated the same cold words. No survivors detected. On the space stations orbiting Mars and Jupiter, soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder staring out at the stars. Many of them had trained beside Mir pilots or Tralvian engineers. The sense of loss was personal. Earth's leaders called for an emergency meeting. Generals, scientists, and diplomats filled the room. The question hung heavy in the air: what now? Some argued that humanity should stay quiet, that fighting the Council would mean extinction. Others said silence was worse than death. But deep down, everyone knew that whatever came next, nothing would be the same. In one quiet moment, a commander spoke up. He didn't shout. His voice was calm, almost tired. "If we do nothing," he said, "then everything they stood for dies with them." The room went silent. No one argued after that. Even with that decision, the road ahead was uncertain. Humanity was strong, but the Council was vast. They controlled thousands of fleets and billions of soldiers. Yet there was something different about humans, something the Council never understood. They fought not for power, but for meaning. Every person who wore the Earth emblem knew what loss felt like. They had grown up on a planet that had seen wars, disasters, and rebirth. They had rebuilt themselves again and again, and now, that same strength burned quietly in their hearts. In the nights that followed, strange things began happening around the solar system. Ships started moving quietly from one base to another. Cargo containers were rerouted under new codes. Old shipyards that had been closed for years suddenly came alive with light. Engineers worked through the night, welding armor plates and testing new engines. Pilots ran simulations again and again until their eyes ached. No one spoke of vengeance out loud, but everyone knew that something was coming. Far beyond Earth, deep space listening posts continued scanning for signals from the lost worlds. Then one day a transmission came through, a faint, broken voice calling for help. It was the last message from the Mir. The signal flickered with static, but a few words came through. "They're burning everything. Don't trust the Council." Then silence forever. The officers who heard it sat in stunned silence. Some clenched their fists. Some turned away, unable to watch the replay. The recording spread through the fleets like wildfire. It wasn't an official order, but something inside every human soldier shifted that day. The Council had gone too far. On Earth, people stopped waiting for politicians to act. They began sending supplies to the fleet. Families wrote letters to the crews heading for deep space. Children drew pictures of their alien friends, now gone, and taped them to the walls of starports. There was sadness, yes, but also unity. A quiet fire was growing inside the human race. Still, Earth's leaders knew that rushing into war would be suicide. They needed time to plan, time to prepare, and time to understand the enemy. So they began gathering information in secret. Spy ships disguised as freighters drifted close to Council space. Data analysts traced communication patterns, trying to find evidence of what really happened to the coalition worlds. Every clue pointed to the same truth. The Galactic Council had ordered the erasure. Not a natural disaster, not an accident. A calculated act to destroy anyone who dared to stand beside humans. The confirmation hit like a thunderbolt. It was no longer just about revenge, it was about survival. If the Council could erase whole species without consequence, humanity would be next. In the dark control rooms of Earth's space fleet, decisions were made quietly. The time for diplomacy was ending. But before the first move could be made, humanity needed one thing, a purpose that went beyond anger. They didn't want to become like the Council. They wanted to fight for those who couldn't fight back anymore. And so, the beginning of a plan formed, not born out of hate, but out of remembrance. Humanity would not shout or threaten. They would build, prepare, and wait. Every worker tightening a bolt on a starship, every pilot running drills, every scientist upgrading reactors, they all carried the same silent promise: this will not happen again. The stars above Earth seemed colder that night, but hidden beneath that silence was something the Council could never destroy. A bond between worlds, a memory too deep to erase. Humanity had lost their friends, but not their spirit. And though the galaxy thought they would bow in fear, they were only getting ready to rise. The weeks after the loss of their allies were the hardest in human history. Every news channel on Earth spoke about the vanished worlds. People everywhere felt the same pain, the same anger, and the same helplessness. It wasn't just a political loss. It was personal. The Mir and the Tralvians had been friends, teachers, and partners. They had shared their knowledge, their music, their laughter. Now it felt as if the stars themselves had gone silent. Inside the Earth Space Command, the atmosphere was heavy. Officers moved quietly through long corridors filled with glowing screens, each showing images of empty planets and destroyed colonies. No one spoke much. Every word felt too small for what they were feeling. In one control room, a team of technicians kept replaying the last Mir transmission, even though they already knew it by heart. The voice was weak, broken by static, yet filled with fear. It repeated the same words again and again before cutting off. That small sound was now the only thing left of an entire civilization. Human leaders gathered daily to discuss what could be done, but nothing they said changed the reality. The Galactic Council had crossed a line that could never be undone. Still, official messages from the Council arrived regularly, full of polite lies. They claimed the coalition worlds had fallen to environmental collapse or internal rebellion. No one on Earth believed it, but the Council's power made it impossible to speak the truth openly. Any direct accusation could mean war, and Earth was not ready for that, not yet. But far away from the politicians, deep inside Earth's military stations, something was already changing. Soldiers were training longer hours. Engineers were working through the night. Fleet commanders quietly reviewed old battle records, searching for weaknesses in Council tactics. None of it was official, but everyone knew why they were doing it. Humanity couldn't bring back their friends, but they could make sure no one else would be erased like that again. The first real sign of defiance came from a small observation post orbiting the frozen moon of Hestara. A group of human officers stationed there picked up strange energy readings from deep within Council space. The pattern was unusual, pulses of light that looked like distress signals but didn't match any known code. At first they thought it was just background noise, but one of the technicians, a quiet man who'd lost his brother on the mirror homeworld, refused to ignore it. He stayed up all night cleaning the signal, running it through filters again and again until the message became clear. It was faint, almost gone, but the words were unmistakable. Someone was alive. A voice spoke slowly, repeating coordinates in a phrase. Survivors. Hidden Council patrols near. Then it cut off. The news spread fast through the command channels. If the message was real, it meant that at least some of the erased species had escaped, but that also meant the Council was still hunting them. The discovery lit a small spark of hope among the crews. Maybe not everyone was gone. Maybe there was still a chance to save someone. A small rescue mission was planned, though no one dared to call it that. On paper, it was just a survey mission to check a debris field. In truth, it was an attempt to find the source of the signal. A small team of human pilots volunteered immediately. They knew the risk. If they were caught inside Council territory, it would mean imprisonment or worse, but not one of them hesitated. For days, they flew silently through the empty stretch of space, engines low, sensors off. When they reached the coordinates, all they found was wreckage. Shattered hulls, drifting metal, the remains of a battle that had already been lost. But inside one of the twisted ships, they found something unexpected. A single escape pod sealed from the inside. The air inside was nearly gone, the lights fading, but there was a faint life sign. They brought it back to the ship and opened it carefully. Inside was a small figure, weak and half-conscious, wearing the familiar markings of the mirror. A survivor. Barely alive but breathing. The moment was overwhelming. Some of the crew cried quietly. Others stood frozen, unable to believe it. Against all odds, one life had made it through. When the ship returned to Earth, the survivor was placed under medical care. It took days before they could speak, and even then their words were slow and broken. What they described confirmed humanity's worst fears. The Galactic Council had ordered a full purification campaign against the coalition worlds. Their fleets had used weapons designed to erase entire ecosystems. There had been no negotiations, no warning. Just silence, then destruction. The survivor also spoke of something more. A secret council project known only by a symbol, a circle divided by 3 lines. They didn't know what it meant, only that it was connected to the decision to destroy the coalition. That small piece of information became the most important clue humanity had ever found. Back on Earth, anger was turning into determination. The public still didn't know the full truth, but whispers had started spreading through the colonies and the fleet. People were saying that Earth's allies hadn't just disappeared, they'd been murdered. The governments tried to keep order, asking for patience and peace, but the people had already made up their minds. The Council had gone too far. In hidden meetings, senior commanders began discussing what could be done next. Officially, humanity was still part of the Council's trade network. That gave them access to information, shipping routes, and communications. Using that, Earth began quietly building something new, a shadow network of scouts and operatives spread across the stars. Their mission was not to fight, but to observe, record, and prepare. Meanwhile, more strange signals began appearing. Sometimes it was a single pulse of light. Sometimes a burst of data hidden inside Council transmissions. Each time it led to more wreckage, more proof of what had happened. Every discovery deepened humanity's resolve. One evening in the command center overlooking Earth's orbit, a message arrived marked with the highest level of secrecy. It contained a single piece of data, an image of a massive structure deep within Council space. It wasn't a planet or a base, it was something else, something built to destroy from a distance. The data was incomplete, but it matched the descriptions the survivor had given. That night, a quiet meeting was held in an underground facility below the Pacific Command Center. Only a handful of people were present, leaders, scientists, and admirals. They studied the image for hours, the room filled with the soft hum of machines. When they were done, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, one of them said softly, "This isn't defense. This is extermination." The decision that followed would change human history forever. They could no longer rely on diplomacy or waiting for justice. The Council had proven it would erase entire species without regret. If Earth didn't act, they would be next. Still, no one wanted open war. Humanity had seen enough of that in its own past. They wanted to protect, not conquer. And so began the earliest stage of what would later be known as the Silent Plan, a coordinated, secret effort to prepare Earth for what was coming. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. Factories across the Moon and Mars began working on new ship designs under false project names. Engineers were told they were developing exploration vessels, but every one of them was built with reinforced armor and long-range weapons. Scientists worked on faster communication systems to link distant fleets. The public saw it as progress, but those who knew the truth understood its purpose. On the training grounds, soldiers practiced new maneuvers, blending human tactics with those learned from their lost allies. They studied the Mirror's graceful flight patterns and the Tralvian's precise coordination. Every movement, every formation was a tribute to the ones who were gone. The memory of those friends became part of human strategy. And still, humanity waited. They didn't rush into war. They listened, they learned, and they planned. The galaxy was vast, and the Council still didn't take Earth seriously. That arrogance would soon become their greatest mistake. Far above the planet, in a quiet observatory, a young technician looked out at the endless stars and whispered softly, "We will not forget." His words echoed what everyone on Earth felt deep inside. Humanity was wounded but not broken. Their silence was not fear. It was the calm before a storm that no one in the galaxy was ready for. The story of what would come next was already written in the eyes of every human soldier, engineer, and pilot. The Council believed they had erased Earth's allies completely. What they didn't realize was that, in doing so, they had united humanity in a way nothing else ever could. The stars would soon remember the names that the Council had tried to erase. And when that day came, the galaxy would understand that humans never forgot those who stood with them. Months passed after the faint Mir survivor's warning, but humanity did not rest. The truth about what the Galactic Council had done no longer felt like a rumor. It was a wound carved deep into the heart of every human being. People didn't talk about it openly. They didn't need to. You could see it in their eyes, in the silence between conversations, and in the way everyone looked toward the stars a little differently now. The sky no longer looked peaceful. It looked like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Earth's leaders had decided long ago that they couldn't announce their next move publicly. The Council was watching everything: trade shipments, communication signals, even routine space traffic. But humanity had always been good at working in the shadows when survival was at stake. That was how it had always been: quiet strength, hidden beneath the surface until the right moment. In secret, a group of commanders, engineers, and scientists began to meet. They gathered in an underground chamber carved deep below the Pacific Ocean, far away from any signal the Council could trace. The meetings had no name at first, but among the few who knew, it eventually became known as the Assembly of Retribution. They weren't just military leaders. Some were researchers who had studied alien technologies. Some were explorers who had traveled to the farthest reaches of space. Others were strategists who had spent their lives learning how to fight against impossible odds. Every person there had lost someone in the Council's attacks. None of them came for revenge. They came because they couldn't let their friend's sacrifice fade into silence. The discussions often lasted for days. They mapped out everything: the Council's patrol zones, their supply routes, and the locations of their listening posts. Information came from countless sources, Traders, old allies, and even former council workers who couldn't bear the guilt anymore. Piece by piece, humanity was building something extraordinary. Not just a battle plan, but a way to strike without becoming what they hated. Every step was taken with care. Earth's main space fleet operated as usual, keeping up the image of peace and routine. But hidden beneath those ordinary ships were new designs, prototypes unlike anything seen before. Engineers worked day and night in orbiting shipyards, welding thick armor and building engines capable of vanishing from sensors. These ships weren't made to invade. They were made to endure. They were built with one purpose: to defend what was right and remind the galaxy that humanity never abandoned those who trusted them. Meanwhile, the Council grew more confident. Their news channels spoke proudly about peace and order. Their fleets paraded across the skies of their capital worlds, showing strength to anyone watching. They thought Earth was broken, too afraid to move. They thought the young human race would accept their control like everyone else had before, but they were wrong. Far away in the silent orbit of Neptune, a ship floated without lights. Inside, hundreds of officers gathered in front of a long table lit only by a soft blue glow. At the center of the table sat a symbol, 3 stars linked by a silver circle. It represented the fallen worlds. No one spoke for a moment. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. One of the senior officers finally broke the silence. "We were not built for revenge," he said quietly, his voice calm. "But we were built to remember. And the galaxy must remember too." Everyone nodded. No speeches were needed. Everyone there had already made their choice long before that night. Humanity was going to act. The first task was gathering ships. Old carriers that had once been retired were brought back to life. Fleets stationed near Mars and Titan were quietly combined under new commands. Cargo freighters were reworked into mobile repair docks. Even civilian engineers volunteered to join, saying they couldn't stay home knowing what was coming. The entire operation was done under the disguise of a deep space exploration program. On paper, Earth was preparing to explore beyond known space. In truth, they were preparing to strike from it. The heart of the new fleet was an idea: unity. Every ship bore markings not of Earth alone, but of the fallen coalition. The insignias of the Mir, the Tralvians, and the Oshari were painted beside Earth's flag as if to say, "You are still with us." It became a quiet tradition among the crews to place small keepsakes from the lost worlds inside their ships. Pieces of art, old recordings, fragments of alien music. They didn't call them trophies. They called them memories. As months turned to a year, the fleet grew stronger, faster, and more coordinated. Scientists developed stealth fields that could bend light and hide entire ships. Communication experts built encryption systems that even the Council's best codebreakers couldn't read. Every day felt like progress, but also like waiting for something bigger. The hardest part was keeping it all secret. The Council had spies everywhere. Any small mistake could expose everything. So humanity relied on trust, a word that had always been at the center of the coalition. Crews swore oaths of silence. Families were told only that their loved ones were serving in deep space assignments. No one questioned it. People understood. Everyone knew something was happening and no one tried to stop it. Then one night in a small command post near the edge of the solar system, a signal arrived. It was faint but clear. A Council fleet had entered the outer territories near a neutral planet. Officially, they were patrolling for pirates, but the data told a different story. They were testing how close they could get to Earth's trade routes. It was a warning disguised as routine. The Assembly of Retribution gathered immediately. The room was filled with tension but no panic. This was what they had been preparing for. After long hours of analysis, they agreed on one decision. They wouldn't strike first. Not yet. But they would show the Council something to remember. A group of stealth cruisers was sent to shadow the Council fleet. They didn't attack or reveal themselves. They simply watched, recorded every move, and sent the data back to Earth. Days later, the Council fleet disappeared from sensors. Completely. The official report said they had experienced a navigation failure near a gravity well. But those who knew the truth understood. Humanity's ships had learned how to become invisible, and the Council had no idea what had happened. That single incident sent quiet waves across the galaxy. Rumors began spreading in the dark corners of trade stations and mining outposts. Some whispered that the humans had discovered something powerful. Others said ghosts from the erased worlds were haunting the Council fleets. Whatever the story, fear began to creep into the hearts of those who once laughed at Earth. Inside the Assembly's hidden base, progress continued. The fleet now had a name, the Guardian Armada. It wasn't about destruction, it was about protection. Every captain, every crew member was trained to remember that. They weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for those who couldn't fight anymore. Earth's people supported the movement without even knowing its full scale. Workers sent supplies to orbiting stations, students joined training programs, and artists began writing songs about the lost worlds. The entire planet was moving in quiet unity. It didn't matter that they didn't know the details. They believed in the cause. Humanity was building something greater than an army. They were building a legacy. The Council, still unaware of what was truly coming, continued its arrogance. They sent warnings to Earth's diplomats, reminding them of the rules of the galaxy. The human representatives smiled politely and agreed to everything, knowing full well that deep beneath the surface, their fleets were already beyond the Council's reach. In the cold of deep space, far from any sun, the first test of the new Guardian ships took place. A group of engineers and pilots gathered inside a dark hangar, watching through reinforced glass as a massive vessel powered up its engines. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the ship vanished. It didn't jump to light speed, it simply disappeared from all sensors. The crew cheered quietly, knowing what this meant. Humanity had done the impossible. They could now move unseen, unheard, untouchable. That moment marked the true beginning of Earth's readiness. The Council still believed they had control over the galaxy. They didn't realize that a storm was forming in silence, a storm built not from hatred but from loyalty, memory, and unity. When the Assembly members met one final time before dispersing across the stars, the atmosphere was calm but heavy with purpose. No one gave a speech. No one declared war. They simply looked at one another, understanding what had to be done. Each one knew they might never return home, but none of them hesitated. One of the senior officers looked around the room and spoke softly. They thought they erased our friends. They thought we'd forget, but memory is stronger than fear. Let them keep watching the skies, they won't see us coming. And with that, the ships began to move, quietly, gracefully, disappearing into the darkness of space. No one on Earth saw it happen. There were no parades, no announcements, no goodbyes, only silence and the promise that someday, justice would speak for those who no longer could. The stars had grown quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the stillness before movement. Deep in the black corners of the galaxy, far from the reach of the Galactic Council, Earth's hidden fleets drifted in formation. Every light was dimmed, every signal coded. To anyone watching, it looked like empty space. But behind that quiet darkness, thousands of human souls waited, calm, focused, and ready. They called it the silent advance. It wasn't announced or recorded. There were no speeches or banners. One moment the ships were in secret dockyards. The next they were gone, swallowed by the vast night. Their engines ran cold to hide their heat signatures, and their communication systems used laser bursts so faint that no sensor could trace them. The crews lived in near darkness, whispering to one another in low voices. Every breath felt heavy, every heartbeat louder than it should be. Days turned into weeks as the fleet moved deeper into Council space. They weren't rushing. They moved with patience, careful not to draw attention. Every few hours, a scout ship would drift ahead, scanning for patrols. When one was spotted, the humans didn't attack. They slipped past quietly, ghosts among the stars. For the first time in history, Earth's fleets were operating far beyond the edges of their own systems. The maps on their screens showed stars that most humans had never even seen before. To the crews, it was both terrifying and beautiful. Some stood by the viewing ports at night, staring at distant suns glowing faintly against the black. Those lights reminded them of home, of everything they were fighting for, and of the friends who had once shared the same sky. Inside the command ships, officers moved calmly through the halls. Every decision mattered. Even a small mistake could expose them. The captains often stayed awake for entire days, reviewing navigation routes again and again, making sure no one would notice their passage. There was tension, yes, but also pride. They were doing something no human fleet had ever done. Back on Earth, few knew what was happening. Only the highest officials were aware that the mission had begun. Families went about their daily lives unaware that their sons and daughters were already deep inside enemy territory. The media spoke of peace, of trade, of diplomacy. But among the stars, a quiet war of shadows had already started. The first test came when one of the Council's patrol groups entered a neutral system unexpectedly. It was a small squadron, nothing compared to the size of Earth's hidden armada, but the timing was dangerous. The human fleet was passing close by. If even one patrol ship detected them, everything would be lost. For nearly 8 hours, the human ships floated completely still, engines off, life support systems running at minimum. The crews sat in silence, eyes fixed on their monitors, listening to the faint hum of the patrol's transmissions echoing through the void. Every minute felt like an hour. Then slowly the Council ships turned away and jumped to another sector. The humans didn't cheer. They simply exhaled quietly and continued forward. That near escape proved one thing: their training worked. As the days passed, small victories like that built confidence. Stealth teams disabled Council listening posts one by one without leaving a trace. Communication relays went dark. Supply routes broke apart. No one knew why. To the Council, it looked like random malfunctions. To humanity, it was the beginning of balance returning. Then came the moment no one could avoid: the first battle. It wasn't planned. A Council scout ship stumbled across one of the human destroyers recharging near a gas giant. The encounter was a matter of seconds. The Council ship sent a distress signal, and 3 more vessels appeared from warp within moments. The humans had no choice. They couldn't flee fast enough without exposing the fleet's position. So the order was simple: disable, not destroy. The destroyer's weapons fired once, precisely, silently. The Council ships froze, their systems short-circuited by targeted energy bursts. No explosions, no chaos, just silence. Within minutes, all enemy ships drifted powerless, engines cold. The humans didn't finish them off. Instead, they erased the distress signal from their logs and let them float away. When news of that encounter reached the assembly back on Earth, the reaction wasn't celebration. It was reflection. The humans had won their first engagement without taking a life, proving that justice didn't need to become cruelty. They weren't here to burn worlds. They were here to stop the ones who did. Word of missing patrols began spreading through Council territory. Admirals in the Council's capital grew uneasy. Their reports made no sense. Fleets disappearing, signals vanishing, bases going silent. Some blamed solar storms. Others blamed sabotage. No one wanted to believe that the humans were behind it. The Council had always thought of Earth as small, emotional, unpredictable, but never capable of this kind of precision. Weeks later, something remarkable happened. In the Creighton Rift, a region known for its unstable gravity fields, a large Council fleet set up a blockade to search for whoever was disrupting their systems. When the human armada entered the same region, both sides detected each other almost instantly. There was no running this time. The humans didn't attack immediately. They held formation, their ships moving in perfect silence, waiting. The Council commanders sent out warnings demanding identification. No answer came. Only the faint glow of human engines burning white against the darkness. Then, in a coordinated motion, the Earth fleet moved forward, not to crush, but to defend. Every maneuver was smooth, every formation precise. It was like watching a single being with 1,000 hearts move together. The Council fired first, sending streams of light across the void. The humans didn't panic. They shifted position, absorbing the blasts through energy shields they had built from old Mir designs. When they finally responded, it wasn't with fury. Their weapons fired in clean, controlled bursts, disabling the Council's main ships without destroying them. It lasted only minutes. The battle was quiet but decisive. The Council's fleet, shocked by the efficiency and unity of the humans, retreated. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy had seen the Council defeated, and not by brute force but by discipline and purpose. After the battle, the humans recovered the surviving enemy crews. They gave them food, water, and medical help before letting them go. The message was clear. This was not revenge. It was remembrance. Humanity hadn't come to rule the stars. They had come to remind the galaxy of justice. Back on Earth, small pieces of information began leaking through trade channels. Traders spoke of strange fleets that moved without sound, of council stations left untouched but empty. People started whispering about the Ghost Armada. The story spread quickly, growing with each retelling. Some said it was myth. Others said it was the spirits of the erased worlds returning for peace. Whatever people believed, one truth remained. Hope was alive again. Inside the human fleet, there was no time for pride. The captains ordered repairs and sent coded reports back to Earth. The battle at the Creighton Rift had proven their strength, but it had also revealed their presence. The Council would be hunting them now. The humans needed to move faster, smarter, quieter. As the fleet drifted through the emptiness, the crew often gathered in small groups after their shifts. They shared stories of home, about the oceans of Earth, the red dust of Mars, the light of the sunrise over the lunar bases. Some spoke of the Mir songs they used to hear during coalition celebrations, the way their voices echoed through the air like silver rain. Others remembered the laughter of Tralvian children in the markets of the free worlds. Every memory became fuel for their courage. In those quiet moments, you could feel the human spirit stronger than ever. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about keeping promises, to protect the innocent, to never forget, to ensure that the galaxy's heart still had room for compassion. The Galactic Council, however, saw things differently. They began mobilizing larger fleets, preparing for what they called containment operations. They still underestimated Earth. They thought they were dealing with a rebellion, a small race acting out of grief. They didn't realize they were facing a united people, strengthened by love, loyalty, and loss. As the human armada moved toward the heart of Council space, the crews knew they couldn't turn back. They didn't want to. Every light year brought them closer to the truth, closer to the moment when the Council would finally see the faces of those they had tried to erase. There were no cries of anger among them, no songs of war. Only silence, discipline, and the steady rhythm of purpose. The stars ahead looked endless, but the humans no longer feared the distance. They had already crossed the line between who they were and who they needed to become. The silent advance had changed everything. It wasn't just a military operation. It was the rebirth of humanity's soul. They had proven to themselves that they could fight without losing their humanity. That strength could exist alongside mercy, and that silence could be louder than any declaration of war. As the last of the fleet disappeared beyond the sensors, a small message was transmitted back to Earth. It contained no words, only a simple signal, the same melody the Mir had once played to welcome their friends. When it reached Earth's receivers, those who recognized it smiled quietly. It was a sign, a promise, and a reminder that their friends among the stars still lived in every human heart, and somewhere, beyond the Richo. The silence that had guided Earth's fleet for months finally broke. For the first time in their long journey, the humans no longer drifted like ghosts among the stars. They had reached the edge of the Galactic Council's central territories, a place so heavily guarded that even merchants avoided it. Ahead lay the clusters of light that marked the Council's power, worlds of glass and metal, full of leaders who believed they were untouchable. Inside the lead ship, the command bridge was dimly lit. Everyone was awake. The main screen showed hundreds of red dots, the Council's defense fleets, scattered across nearby systems. Each dot represented thousands of ships, each armed and ready. The humans knew this was not going to be a battle fought in shadows anymore. They had spent months preparing for this. Every crew member understood the mission: reveal the truth, stop the Council from erasing more worlds, and make sure the galaxy remembered what justice meant. But none of them wanted destruction. They didn't want to become what they hated. The goal was to expose the truth, not to burn the galaxy for revenge. As the fleet drifted closer, transmissions began to fill the channels. The Council had noticed them. Voices crackled through the static, demands for identification, threats, and orders to surrender. No reply came from the humans. The silence continued. The fleet held position near the orbit of a dying star, its light dim and red, like the last breath of a sunset. Every eye on the bridge turned toward the main screen. The commander stood quietly looking at the glowing red star. He didn't give a speech. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "We show them who we are." Then, without firing a single weapon, the human fleet began broadcasting the hidden recordings they had collected, evidence of the Council's crimes. Footage of erased colonies, voices of survivors who had been silenced. Images of destroyed mirror cities and the empty skies where once there had been laughter and light. The transmission spread faster than the council could block it. Every network, every trading hub, every private channel in the galaxy began to receive the same signal. People stopped what they were doing. In mining stations and farms, on luxury worlds and schools, everyone saw it. For the first time, the truth was no longer a whisper. It was a roar across the stars. On the council's homeworld, panic broke out. Leaders rushed to shut down the feed, but it was too late. Their systems were being overridden by a code the humans had planted long ago. A code built from technology shared by the mirror themselves. Within minutes, every corner of the galaxy had seen what the council tried to erase. The response was immediate and powerful. In dozens of worlds, smaller species began to protest. Some refused to obey the council's orders. Others shut down their trade routes. A few even offered to help the humans in secret. The balance that had held for centuries started to crumble, but the council was not ready to let go. Within hours, they deployed their grand fleet, the largest armada ever assembled in history. Millions of ships filled the space near their capital world, forming rings of defense that stretched for light years. The humans were outnumbered beyond reason, but they didn't retreat. They held their position near the dying star, their ships lined up in calm, perfect formation. The council sent one last message: leave or be erased. The commander looked around at his crew. Some were scared, some were calm, but none stepped back. "If they erase us," he said quietly, "then the galaxy will still remember who we were." And that's enough. The council fired first. Beams of light crossed the void, streaking toward the human fleet. For a moment, it looked like the stars themselves were falling apart. The shockwaves echoed across the empty expanse. Yet when the dust cleared, the human ships still stood. Their shields, powered by a new hybrid energy derived from mirror designs, held strong. The humans didn't answer with destruction. Instead, they released a wave of electromagnetic pulses, carefully aimed to disable the attacking ships without destroying them. Thousands of council vessels went dark, drifting powerless in space. But there were too many of them. For every fleet disabled, more appeared from warp. The humans knew they couldn't hold forever. The battle became a dance of strategy, each move calculated, every step measured. They fought not to conquer, but to protect the chance for truth to live. Hours turned into a day. Debris floated silently through the blackness. The red star flickered weakly, its light struggling to reach the ships. Inside the human vessels, exhaustion began to show. People worked without rest, their hands trembling but steady. Then suddenly something unexpected happened. From the far edge of the sector, hundreds of new signals appeared. At first, the humans thought it was another council reinforcement wave. But when the transmissions came through, they were stunned. It was the Free Worlds Alliance. Independent planets that had once feared the council were now joining the fight. They had seen the truth broadcasted by the humans. They had watched the erased world's final moments and decided they could no longer stay silent. Their ships were smaller, weaker, but their hearts were strong. Messages of unity began pouring in from all corners of the galaxy. "We stand with you. For the erased. For the truth." The council's massive fleet started to falter. Confusion spread among their ranks. Some refused to fight. Others turned their weapons away, unwilling to destroy those who were defending justice. The galaxy, once divided by fear, began to shift. The humans didn't claim victory. They didn't even call it a win. They just kept moving, protecting the new allies who joined them. Together, they built a shield wall, a massive defense field that blocked the council's weapons without harming anyone. For hours, the two sides stared at each other across the void, neither willing to take the next step. Then came the turning point. The dying red star at the center of the battlefield began to collapse. It had been unstable for centuries, and now, with so many ships nearby, its gravity became unpredictable. Both sides realized the danger. Instead of running, the humans made a bold move. They activated their engines and used the star's energy to power one final transmission, an enormous wave that carried a single message across the galaxy. Power means nothing without mercy. The erased still live in us, the message echoed everywhere. On the council's worlds, people paused. On remote colonies, miners lifted their heads. Across stations, families gathered to listen. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder of what it meant to be alive. As the red star finally collapsed, its light exploded outward. Both fleets were forced to retreat, escaping the expanding wave. The humans guided damaged council ships to safety as they withdrew. Even in chaos, they refused to abandon compassion. When the light faded and silence returned, the galaxy was no longer the same. The council's image of power had been shattered. Millions of people now questioned everything they had been told. The humans, though battered and exhausted, had done what they came to do. They had revealed the truth, and they had done it without losing their humanity. In the days that followed, messages of peace began arriving from unexpected places. Worlds that had once feared Earth now sent offers of friendship. Even some council members, once proud and unyielding, began speaking of reform. It was slow, fragile, and uncertain, but it was real. The human fleet, scarred but unbroken, started its journey home. They didn't celebrate. They didn't shout. They simply watched the stars passing by, silent and golden. They knew the fight wasn't truly over, it had only changed shape. Justice wasn't something won in a single battle. It had to be protected every day by people who remembered why they fought. Back on Earth, the first transmissions from the returning fleet arrived. Families gathered in the streets watching the skies. The faces of the soldiers appeared on screens, tired, pale, but smiling. For a long moment, the entire planet stood in stillness. Then the cheering began, not for victory, but for survival. For truth. For unity. Children pointed to the stars, asking about the Mir, the erased allies who had once stood beside humanity. Teachers told them that they were not gone, that their legacy lived on in the courage of those who refused to forget. The memory of those lost worlds had become a light guiding everyone forward. As the sun rose over Earth, its light touched the oceans, the mountains, and the cities that had once lived in fear. The people knew now that they were not alone, and that even among the stars, kindness could be stronger than power. The humans didn't rebuild their fleets for conquest. Instead, they turned them into peacekeeping vessels, carriers of aid, rebuilding the destroyed colonies, helping the smaller species rise again. Their mission was no longer war. It was healing. Far away at the edge of the galaxy, a few surviving Mir ships hidden for years finally sent out a signal. It was faint, soft, and full of melody, the same tone that had once filled the skies during their celebrations. The signal reached Earth's orbiting satellites and was decoded within hours. It said only one thing: we remember. When the message was played on Earth, people cried. It wasn't sadness, it was gratitude. Humanity had kept its promise. And as night fell across the planet, the stars looked brighter than ever. They no longer seemed distant or cold. They felt alive, filled with voices and stories waiting to be told. The humans who had once gone to bring vengeance had returned with peace. The galaxy would still face challenges, but now it had something it hadn't felt in generations: hope. The galaxy felt different now. Where once there had been fear, silence, and control, there was now a cautious but growing sense of life. The humans had returned from the heart of the Galactic Council's territory not as conquerors, but as witnesses. They carried the memories of the erased worlds, the proof of injustice, and the message that courage could change everything. Earth's fleet, though still recovering from months of travel and shadowed battles, became a symbol across star systems. The ships were repaired, refitted, and rejoined by smaller allies from the Free Worlds Alliance and other planets that had dared to stand up to the Council. What had once been a hidden force was now recognized as a guardian of truth. They did not march with weapons ready to destroy. They moved with care, with diplomacy, with the quiet confidence that only people who had faced near destruction could possess. Back on Earth, life had shifted too. People no longer looked up at the stars and felt small or powerless. They saw potential, hope, and connection. Children played under artificial suns and orbiting space stations, unaware of how close the galaxy had come to losing everything, but carrying the stories of heroes in their hearts. Schools included lessons about the Mir, the Tralvians, and other erased civilizations, teaching empathy, respect, and courage alongside science. Artists painted murals depicting the vanished worlds. Musicians wrote melodies inspired by alien voices, and writers told stories that preserved their memory. Humanity had learned that remembrance itself was a form of power. The Galactic Council, though weakened and shaken by exposure, did not collapse overnight. Some members resisted, clinging to old pride and hierarchy. Others quietly began to question their methods, realizing that the galaxy was no longer blind. The seeds of reform had been planted, and though they would take time to grow, the direction of change was clear. Truth had become a stronger force than fear. Humanity's first priority was to rebuild relationships. Scouts and diplomats were sent to planets that had been abandoned or damaged. Supplies of food, water, and medicine were delivered to colonies that had once been cut off. Engineers taught local species how to repair their own ships and stations, sharing knowledge without demanding loyalty. Slowly, the galaxy started to heal. Old fears were replaced with gratitude and cautious optimism. The surviving Mir and Tralvian communities, hidden for years in remote sectors, began to emerge. They approached cautiously, but when they saw the humans' fleets helping instead of destroying, they began to trust again. Emotional reunions were held in orbit above neutral planets, where humans and former allies exchanged stories, songs, and memories. Tears were shed for lost friends, but also for the lives that had been preserved. Humanity had not only survived, they had kept the promise that no one would be forgotten. On the command ships, the human leaders gathered to discuss the future. They didn't speak of revenge or retaliation anymore. Their work had proven that strength alone was not enough. Empathy, patience, and wisdom mattered even more. "We cannot be like them," said one officer, staring at the map of stars projected in the center of the room. "We can protect, guide, and inspire. That is our power now." Technology that had once been used in secret for stealth and defense was repurposed. Communication networks were expanded to reach even the most distant colonies. Energy systems that powered the fleet's shields and engines were shared with developing worlds. Humanity demonstrated that knowledge and care could build stronger bonds than intimidation ever could. Trade routes reopened. Systems that had been silent for decades buzzed with activity again. The galaxy was slowly knitting itself back together. The human fleet, though still formidable, no longer needed to hide in darkness. Ships moved openly, carrying aid, education teams, and envoys. They were a living message. The universe was safer when justice guided power. Yet there were lessons learned in those long months of preparation and conflict. Every crew member knew the cost of inaction. They remembered the erased worlds, the Mir and Tralvian friends whose voices had been silenced, and they vowed never to let history repeat itself. Memorials were established on neutral planets and in orbit around Earth, places where people of every species could honor those lost and remind future generations of the cost of apathy. The Council of Humans, scientists and allied species convened regularly to discuss how to maintain peace. They didn't try to dominate. Instead, they offered guidance, facilitated communication, and ensured that no single group could again rise unchecked. Slowly, the galaxy began to understand that leadership did not require fear. It required responsibility, courage, and care for all life. Children of multiple species, who had only known the fear of control and silence, began to grow up in a galaxy that valued cooperation. They trained in schools that emphasized empathy and problem-solving alongside strategy and engineering. They learned that listening and understanding could be just as important as strength in numbers. These young minds carried forward the hope and memory of the lost civilizations, becoming the guardians of a galaxy that would never again forget the value of life. Years passed, and the once hidden fleets became ambassadors of hope. Explorers ventured to worlds that had never been contacted before, offering friendship rather than conquest. Scientific missions were shared among multiple species, fostering understanding and respect. Earth's fleet still existed strong and ready, but they were no longer feared. They were trusted. They became a bridge between species, connecting distant stars with knowledge, compassion, and security. The Mir survivors played a special role. They shared stories of their lost cities, songs, and histories, ensuring their culture would survive. The Tralvians, cautious but determined, rebuilt their communities with human assistance. Together, humans and former allies established networks of memory, archives, schools, and art collections that preserved everything the Council had tried to erase. Memory itself became a shield, protecting the galaxy from future injustice. Even the Galactic Council began to change. Some of its leaders, inspired by humanity's example, advocated for reforms. They realized that power enforced through fear would never last, and that collaboration was stronger than domination. Slowly, council chambers that had once been filled with arrogance began to hear voices of reasoning, compromise, and respect. Humanity's actions had created a ripple effect, proof that one courageous species could shift the balance of an entire galaxy. Despite all the progress, the humans never forgot the cost. Ceremonies were held on Earth and in orbiting stations for those who had died, for the friends who had been erased, and for the survivors who had suffered in silence. Every ceremony was a quiet reminder that the galaxy's protection depended on vigilance, unity, and compassion. As peace settled across the stars, the human fleet continued its patrols, not to attack but to safeguard. Scouts watched for disturbances. Engineers helped repair old colonies, and diplomats mediated conflicts before they could escalate. The galaxy no longer feared humans as conquerors. It respected them as guardians. And through this respect, a deeper bond formed between worlds that had once been divided by fear and silence. In time, the galaxy began to flourish. Trade resumed, science advanced, and culture spread across systems. Music and art from countless species merged, creating a new era of expression. Stories of lost civilizations were no longer whispers. They were celebrated. Children grew up hearing tales of courage, friendship, and unity. Humanity's choice to protect rather than destroy had left an enduring legacy. Yet, even in this age of peace, the humans remembered the lessons of the silent advance, the battles near the Red Star, and the months spent drifting in darkness. They never allowed themselves to become complacent. The memory of the erased worlds remained a compass, guiding every decision, every action, and every choice made in the name of justice, and above all, they understood the truth that had carried them through the most dangerous times. Strength without compassion was empty, but courage guided by memory and care could shape the future. They had learned that silence could speak louder than fear, that restraint could achieve more than rage, and that hope, even in the darkest void, was the most powerful force in the universe. The human fleet continued to drift between stars, but now it carried more than ships and weapons. It carried history, remembrance, and the promise that no life would be erased without consequence. They were the living testimony of friendship, loyalty, and courage. Wherever they went, planets remembered that the humans had not only survived the Council's wrath but had turned devastation into opportunity, fear into hope, and silence into a voice that resonated across the galaxy. At night, on Earth and on distant colonies, people would look up at the stars and whisper stories of the vanished worlds. They told their children about the courage it took to face overwhelming odds, about the friends who had been lost and saved, about the humans who chose mercy over vengeance. And as these stories spread, the galaxy remembered not only what had been destroyed but what had endured: love, loyalty, and the promise of a better future. The stars no longer felt cold or indifferent. They were alive with memory, with witness, and with hope. Humanity had discovered that the greatest power was not in fleets or weapons, but in the choice to protect life, to honor the past, and to guide the future. And as the gala,